Welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at a deeply frustrating, honestly intensely personal phenomenon that millions of people are experiencing right this very second. Think about it. You wake up, you go to work, you put in your 40 hours, maybe way more, and yet at the end of the month, the math just doesn't work. The numbers in your bank account do not match the sheer effort you're putting into your life. Today, we're unpacking what we're calling the American wallet paradox. We're going to dive strictly into the official data, pulling from the Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau, to build a real documentary-style picture of exactly what is happening to our money. It's kind of the question of the decade, isn't it? Why are so many Americans running out of money while working full-time? Look, if you're feeling this financial anxiety, I want to validate that for you right now. You are not mismanaging your money. You are caught up in a massive structural squeeze. The official economic data perfectly maps out this stark reality, and we're going to trace exactly where the leaks in the American wallet are coming from. Okay, let's peel back the first layer. Layer 1, the cost of living shock. Now, we aren't going to get bogged down in abstract economic theory here. We are looking at unavoidable, completely inelastic necessities. You know, the things you literally have to buy just to survive and participate in society. The official Bureau of Labor Statistics data for the Consumer Price Index shows an undeniable upward trajectory. Overall inflation hit 4.2% in May 2026. Now, I know 4.2% might not sound apocalyptic on its own, but remember, that is an aggregate number. It averages out the whole shebang. To really understand the squeeze we're in, we have to look right beneath the surface. Because the real problem is the disparity. When we contrast that general consumer inflation rate of 4.2% against energy cost inflation, the reality is just brutal. Energy costs spiked by a massive 23.5% over that same 12-month period. That's the cost of heating your home, turning on your lights, and literally powering your life. When a foundational cost like energy jumps nearly a quarter in a single year, it ripples through absolutely every single thing you do. Let's look at how this builds into your daily routine. We aren't talking about luxury goods here. These are everyday necessities. Fuel oil, up 58.9%. Gasoline, just to drive to your full-time job, up 40.5%. And then shelter and food are compounding right on top of those energy spikes at 3.4 and 3.1%. These data points represent a direct, unavoidable tax on the American commute and the American dinner table. You can't just choose to not drive to work. You can't just choose to not eat. You are forced to absorb these costs. And honestly, the shelter element has been brewing for a very long time. Federal Reserve Governor Lyle Brainerd actually pointed this out, noting that from 2007 to 2018, the share of income spent on rent rose from 18% to 25% for middle-income renters. That's an authoritative insight, showing us that well before the current inflation shock, the housing squeeze was actively eroding middle-class balance sheets. The foundation was already incredibly fragile before the storm even hit. Which brings us to layer 2, the evaporating safety net. So what actually happens when wages stagnate, but the baseline cost of survival climbs? Well, the math dictates that something has to give. And what gives first is household savings. $704.2 billion. I'm going to slow down for a second and just let the gravity of that number sink in. That represents the total personal savings at an annual rate as of May 2026. Now, sure, that sounds like a massive number, right? But in the context of the entire U.S. economy, it represents a dramatically depleted reserve. Let me show you why. The personal saving rate plummeted to just 3.0% of disposable income in May 2026. Just since the first quarter of 2025, the annual saving capacity dropped by a staggering $459 billion. Families are actively draining their reserves just to pay for those everyday necessities we just talked about. In fact, the Federal Reserve's own survey tells us that today only 63% of adults can cover a simple $400 emergency using cash or its equivalent. That's down significantly from a 68% high in 2021. The safety net that everyone built up during the pandemic, it's completely deteriorated. Millions are dangerously exposed to even the most minor economic shock. Okay, so if the savings are gone, how exactly are people surviving this cost of living shock? They're borrowing. Data from the New York Fed paints a crystal clear cause and effect narrative here. Total aggregate household debt has reached $18.8 trillion. We've got $13.19 trillion tied up in mortgages, $1.69 trillion in auto loans, and an absolutely unbelievable $1.25 trillion sitting right on credit cards. As savings evaporate, everyday Americans are just shifting their basic survival costs directly onto massive debt balances. And that leads us directly into layer 3, the credit card debt trap. See, when you are forced to use debt to pay for things like groceries and gasoline, surviving inflation suddenly becomes a highly lucrative business for major financial institutions. 22.8%. That is the average credit card annual percentage rate across the entire United States. Just think about that number for a sec. It's the highest level recorded since the Federal Reserve began tracking the specific data way back in 1994. It is an absolutely crushing cost of borrowing, and it acts like a heavy anchor on the American wallet. The really crucial thing is understanding exactly why that rate is so astronomically high. It's not just because the underlying prime rate went up. Actually, it's mostly because of something called the APR margin. That's the extra little percentage card issuers tack on top to generate profit. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, average APR margins hit 14.3%, the highest on record. These margin increases alone drove about half of the total rate hikes over the last decade. And what was the result? It quietly generated an estimated $25 billion in additional interest revenue for major credit card companies. That cost the average cardholder over $250 in excess charges. And the kicker, they did all this despite the share of risky, subprime borrowers remaining totally stable. To really put the scale of this into perspective, on one side, we have a towering $1.25 trillion in total consumer credit card debt. On the other side, $25 billion in extra interest revenue generated purely from banking margin hikes. It highlights a really stark paradox. The credit card industry generates its absolute highest returns exactly when consumers are forced to revolve balances just to keep their heads above water. The pain of the everyday American consumer is directly converted into record banking profitability. Let's wrap this all together. The middle class squeeze. We've looked at all the macroeconomic data together, the inflation rates, the massive savings drops, the sneaky APR margins. But now we have to tie it back to the microeconomic reality of the American family. Researchers actually have a term for what we're seeing right now: balance sheet depletion. This happens when households actively exhaust their liquid reserves just to cover everyday cost increases. It drastically reduces their resilience against any unexpected economic shocks. I want to be incredibly clear about this. What we are looking at is a systemic liquidity drain. When basic necessities inflate wildly and borrowing costs are engineered to record highs, people running out of money is not a sign of widespread individual financial mismanagement. No way. It is the mathematical certainty of a structural squeeze. The safety nets are quite simply exhausted. The data from our Federal Reserve and BLS sources tells one unified, undeniable story. Without a sustained period where real wage growth actively exceeds cost of living inflation, or at least a significant easing of borrowing and housing costs, the financial strain on households is only going to intensify. The structural forces draining consumer liquidity are currently just outpacing the American worker's ability to earn. So, I want to leave you with this final, lingering thought. If the personal savings safety net is largely gone, and the cost to borrow money is sitting at historic record highs, how long can the American consumer actually endure this squeeze? It's a profound question about the true state of the middle-class dream today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep looking closely at the data, and we'll see you next time.